Funny thing, if you were a little nervous, I've been doing this for 30 years and I still get a little nervous. You know, I remember when I was in graduate school, and my dad said, he was a Lutheran minister for like 40 years before he retired, and so obviously did a lot of public speaking. He said, it just means you care and you want to do well. I was like, okay, well, that doesn't calm me down, but it helps me feel better, you know. Again, I'm Scott. I work in the Department of Translational Neuroscience. I don't really educate medical students as much as I actually mentor graduate students, right? So Graham and I sort of represent what medical schools do in the field of dementia. We train the next generation of clinicians, dementia clinicians, like maybe these two right here. And we also train the next generation of dementia researchers, okay? So we're both kind of tag teaming this stuff as we're doing our jobs. So a few years ago, every few years, I like to just sort of give an update on like what's going on with therapies for Alzheimer's disease, right? Where are we? Heard some good examples of some therapies that just came off. They're just now coming on board for some of the psychiatric symptoms. But, you know, what are the therapies that are actually attacking the disease and slowing it down, right? So your cognitive issues are slower to evolve. At this point, we don't really think it's realistic to stop Alzheimer's disease in its tracks, but the idea is to just slow it down, right? Or to prevent its onset longer than it normally would with a drug than if you didn't have the drug, right? Okay, so a couple years ago, the last time I did this, we talked about a new drug that had just come to the market. And I talked about that it was controversial that it came to the market. And as it turned out, this drug that was called aducanumab, or the trade name was Aduhelm, actually wasn't used by clinicians. They thought the risk-benefit was too wonky to risk it. And I'll show you a little bit of what I mean by that. And so it got discontinued because no one was using it and they didn't think it was safe for the patients. However, since then, we have had two, and you probably know this, we've had two new drugs that have been FDA approved in the last 3 years or so, okay? And these drugs are the one that got discontinued, as well as the ones that are now FDA approved and are actually being used in the clinics, doctors are using these, are what we call amyloid antibodies, okay? And so I just wanted to start by saying, what do we mean by antibodies, first of all, right? So antibodies are, there's part of our natural defense system. These are our like internal warriors, right? They recognize, attack, and remove foreign substances, invaders like viruses, right? So scientists now leverage this defense system, not by using antibodies that you make, but actually by making antibodies, custom antibodies in a lab, okay? And so then these antibodies are given by infusion, so you can go into an infusion clinic, and these custom antibodies recognize, attack, and remove specific targets, right? Like cancer cells, like Keytruda is a good example, okay? Or inflammation cells, like Skyrizi, right? Nothing is everything, yeah. And then now that we're targeting Alzheimer's pathology, and specifically what we're targeting are, and Rhea mentioned this as one of the pathologies, the amyloid plaques, okay? And so here's like a view under the microscope of these plaques in the brain. And so we've got a nice little thin piece of brain tissue that was taken from an autopsy of a brain from an Alzheimer's patient, and you put it on the microscope slide and you use a special stain to visualize the plaques, and this is what they look like. And these are, of course, completely abnormal. Your brains should not have these in them, okay? And so now we have these two new drugs that, again, this is like the first in 30 years that we've actually had an FDA-approved drug that clinicians are using. So that's actually exciting in and of itself. But these are custom antibodies that are designed to recognize, attack, and remove those plaques, okay? And so here's an example. This is one of the drugs. And these are PET scans, and these are PET scans of the amyloid that's in your brain. So this is, while you're sitting there in the scanner, this is what the doctors can see, right? And so when you see these hot spots, all this red stuff here, that's where those plaques are built up in the brain of a person with Alzheimer's disease, okay? And so this is an example of what the drug does. So these are 4 different people, and this is sort of at baseline when they first started. This is the person 1 year later who got the placebo, like just the infusion with nothing in it, right? And that's just how clinical trials work. Some people get the drug, some people get the placebo, so you can figure out the drug's going to work compared to the placebo. And as you can see, their plaques are still there. Those red hot spots are still there. But then these 3 patients who had actually varying doses of this particular drug, you can see 1 year later, you're losing all those red hot spots. So it's actually removing the plaques from the brain. So it's doing what it's as advertised, right? It's designed to remove these plaques, and it's doing it. The question is, how does this relate to slowing cognitive deterioration, right? And so the first drug, this is the lecanemab. This was approved about 3 years ago. The trade name for this one is Leqembi, okay? And I haven't seen this one on TV, but maybe I missed it. But it was FDA approved about 3 years ago. And this is just some of the details of the trial. We don't need to go into that too much. But it showed a 27% slowing of cognitive decline over 18 months, okay? And importantly, it had fewer side effects than that first, now discontinued drug, amyloid antibody. And here's an example of what they're doing. And so actually, let me show you this first. So this is an example of how it's slowing the cognitive decline. So this is time. These are the patient visits where they're having their cognitive tests, okay? And as you can see, this person on the placebo, and so here's our cognition. This is good cognition and and worsening cognition as the arrow's going down. So their cognition is worsening over time. The person with the amyloid antibody, lecanemab, they also were, getting progressively worse, but at a slower pace. Okay, so again, it's slowing it down by about 27-30%. And so to compare that to the previous trial, this aducanumab, their clinical trials showed, they had 2 trials, they were identical. One showed a 20% slowing and the other one showed 0. And that's what made it controversial because people were like, okay, how do we, believe this? The other thing is that the side effects, and these side effects are called ARIA, and what that basically refers to are brain bleeds and brain swelling, okay? So not good for you, right? And about 35% of the patients would have these side effects. And so again, doctors just felt the risk-benefit wasn't there, right? Especially if it's 20% or 0, right, slowing. But now we've got this drug, 27-30% slowing, and the side effects are about half. So that's an acceptable profile for the doctors to use. The other one that's been on the market for 2 years is the donanemab, and this one's called, the trade name for this is Kisunla. You've probably seen this one on TV. Here comes the sun, that one. And this was the clinical trial that kind of got them to the FDA approval. This time they had a 35% slowing. Now the safety profile was a little bit worse, but they were actually able to identify that it's people with a certain genetic makeup that are most likely to get these side effects. So they test you before you would take the drug, and if you fall into this category, then they won't recommend you taking it, right? So the safety profile is actually a lot better for the folks who aren't in that particular category, and that category is actually kind of rare. And one thing I wanted to point out that I should have on the last page is that Graham was talking about how expensive these drugs are. So with the Medicare copay, the Leqembi is $440 a month, and the Kisunla is $530 a month. So again, if you're retired and you're on a fixed income, this is still a lot of money, right? So it creates this sort of disparity barrier, if for access. But here's sort of the result of the clinical trial, and again, this is visits along this line as time goes on over the 18 months. And these were then they had the cognitive tests, and as you can see, the people on the placebo did worsen, right? But then the people on the donanemab, they got a little bit worse, but not as bad. So about a 35% slowing, okay? And so one of the big controversies in the field right now, and this is sort of getting us to our next step of the presentation, is that it's still not really clear if 30% slowing of cognitive decline is even something that'll register for the patient, right? Of course, you have no idea because people progress at different rates, and so we don't even really know what was supposed to happen to begin with, right? And so what we really want is something that's going to be like 50%, something like that at least, right? And so now they're again testing these amyloid antibodies, but they're doing it in what's called a prevention trial, okay? And this is called the AHEAD study, so AHEAD, sort of getting ahead of the disease. It's a phase 3 study. It's actually fully enrolled now, and the data is going to be reported out, supposed to be the next, year and a half or so. And so these are people who, these other clinical trials that people came into the trial with mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. Now they have people who have no memory problems, right? But they have evidence of plaques, a high plaque load in their brain through those PET scans, okay? And then they also have high plasma blood levels of amyloid, suggesting a buildup of amyloid in the brain, as well as another protein called tau. And tau is part of the tangles that Rhea was talking about, and we'll get to that one in just a minute. And again, there's a big trial, 1,500 people, 107 sites. These are the sites just in the U.S. alone. And so these folks are going to, again, they all don't have memory problems right now when they enter the trial, and they're going to get this lecanemab or Leqembi or the placebo every month for 4 years, okay? So it's a long trial. And it's going to be randomized and double-blinded, and that's for these, we'll talk about phase 3 trials in a minute, but these trials typically are double-blinded, meaning neither the patient nor the participant knows if they have the drug or the placebo, right? And so it prevents like bias when you're, observing someone's cognitive functioning during a testing. And so the goal is to show that the participants who are on the drug have a delayed time frame until they begin to show symptoms, right? And then we'll see, once they show symptoms, if the slowing really starts to separate from the placebo. Some caveats to this are some people just have high amyloid plaques in their brain and they just never will get dementia, right? They're called resilient folks. And that's about 20% of people, I think, as the latest numbers. And that could skew the results. But again, this is going to be an important trial to understand if we start people early enough, can the drug work better, right? It's the same idea of, we want to start, like think about a cancer drug, you want to start at stage 1 or 2 and not stage 4 or 5, right? So it's just much better chance of success. Okay, so that's it for the amyloid antibodies. They're still in development, as you'll see, but the field is thinking, okay, if 30% is as good as we can do, we've got to spread out and branch out into other targets, right? And so this is what's exciting to me. We got lots of targets now, okay? So these are the clinical trials that are in phase 3. So this is a guy named Jeff Cummings, and he does this every year and reports it in Alzheimer's and Dementia. It's the Alzheimer's Association's scientific journal. So he puts together these little pie charts. And so right now we have, so let's talk about phase 3 first. So these again are those large cohorts, several hundred to several thousand, usually at lots of different centers to make sure it's a generalizable result, to the whole broader population. They're typically longer trials, so you can observe these medium to long-term effects and gather more safety data. Again, they're that double-blinded, so you don't know who's got the drug and who's got the placebo. And again, the goal is to convince the FDA that the drug says what it's supposed to, that comes as advertised, and then get approval and then get it to the marketplace. And now our patients have another option for treatment, right? So that's the goal. So we've got 36 of these. A little over 50% are what we call the disease, not dual task training, DTT, but disease targeting therapies, okay? And that means these are drugs designed to slow down the disease, to actually modify the progression of the disease. And about 30% of them are these biologics, which are sort of the large molecules that are usually injected, like subcutaneous, like Enbrel, or even the GLP-1 drugs. And then a lot of them, and this is the exciting part, is that they're small molecules, meaning they come in a pill and they can get into your brain right away, no problem. So it's much better access to the brain. And so, they're targeting specific targets that are important to what we think causes the dementia symptoms. A lot of the drugs are for the cognitive enhancement, right, like Olivia was talking about. And then about 20% of the drugs are for the neuropsychiatric symptoms that Graham was talking about. Now, of these disease-modifying therapies, you can see amyloid's still got a big piece of the pie, but now we're hitting like 40% of them are aimed at those neurotransmitters that Graham was just talking about, like acetylcholine and the glutamate and norepinephrine. And so it may improve cognition, but also maybe have some effects for the neuropsychiatric effects as well. But then now we've got some other categories that we're targeting, right? So bioenergetics, so keeping those nerve cells, those neurons nice and fully charged so they can work better, right? Inflammation is a big one. There's a lot of inflammation that occurs in the brain in Alzheimer's disease, and they think that if we can stop that will slow down degeneration in the brain. And then we have some other categories like here, including like neuroprotection, and one that I'm really kind of interested in are these multi-target drugs. So they can hit like 3 or 4 targets at once. So, it could be like a one-stop shopping type drug. So that's phase 3. What's in phase 2? Okay, so we've got these, phase 2 again are these smaller cohorts. The idea here is to have success. You can get to phase 3, right? They're often randomized to compare different doses and methods. So then the idea is that if you get a predetermined endpoint successfully, like slowing cognitive decline, you can figure out what's the dose and method, like timing, whatever, that works the best, okay, and then get it to a phase 3 trial. So again, now have a lot more of these disease-targeting therapies. So now we're up above 70%, right, of these drugs, which is good. We still have the cognitive enhancers and the neuropsychiatric agents coming along through the pipeline. But now look at this. Amyloid's only got 10% of the pie now, so we really are branching out, right? Again, we got those neurotransmitters. Now there's a much bigger percentage of drugs in the pipeline. They're targeting that inflammation that we think is really important. And again, we're getting a larger piece of the pie, hitting those multi-targets, and then you can sort of see some of these other categories, including protecting the neurons as well as improving blood flow in the brain. Okay. But the sum here is that right now we've got 120 drugs in the pipeline. So that's actually a good number, and that kind of gives you a little bit of hope, right? It gives me a little bit of hope. Because there's a good rationale for most of these drugs wouldn't get as far as they have if there wasn't a really good rationale for what they should work, right? Or at least help. Okay, so speaking of branching out, what about, we know about the amyloid antibodies, what about the tau antibodies? And so again, Rhea mentioned the 2 main pathologies in the Alzheimer's brain are the plaques and these tangles. And the tangles are made of this protein called tau. And these are, so here's another, like looking under the microscope again, and these are tau tangles in the brain. Okay, and so again, we've got a nice little piece of tissue that was donated by an Alzheimer's patient. It's on a slide, it's stained with a special stain to see these tangles, and all these little dark, those are all neurons filled with these tangles. So again, abnormal, those should not be there. And so, the main tau antibody that they're working on right now is called ADVAC, okay? There was a European study that generated a good bit of buzz a few years ago. It had promising results for slowing cognitive decline and stabilizing those activities of daily living. The other cool thing about this was there were no reports of those side effects, right? So it seems to be very safe. And there's actually a new, actually I said phase 3, I think it's actually a phase 2, so I may have misspoke there. But again, there's that same graph that I've been showing you. These are the times when the patients are tested cognitively, and as you can see, the people on the placebo are declining like this, and then the people with the tau antibody are having a slower, like 30% decline. And so you're saying, okay, well, the amyloid's 30%, tau's 30%, that's not much better. Well, the new trial is called a combination therapy trial. We're going to hit plaques and tangles at the same time, okay? And so this is the Alzheimer's Tau platform. This is a big NIH-funded study. And so the goal is to test, what they're funded to do is to find the two most promising Tau drugs and test them, or antibodies, and test them along with the donanemab, the Kisunla, okay? And the lead Tau drug is this Advac that I was just talking about, okay? And so again, the rationale is if we can remove plaques and remove tangles from the brain, maybe we'll get an additive effect. So it's, like 60% slowing of cognitive symptoms. Here's just, so they also have PET scans for the tangles, and they tend to be like down here, okay, in these lower areas of the cortex, okay? You see those little red hot spots right there? And these are two different patients who, these two were on placebo, and you can see those little red hot spots are still there. And the people with the Advac are losing those hot spots, suggesting that these tangles are actually, the drug's doing what it's advertised to do. It's removing the tangles. And so the goal here, so you got three groups. 150 are going to, it is phase 2, I apologize, yeah. So 150 folks will get the placebo, 150 folks will get that Kisunla, and then 150 folks will get the Kisunla plus the Advac, okay? And the idea then is to show that the combination therapy works better than just the amyloid therapy alone, okay? So that's that. And then they're going to test another drug too on top of that. And I think this one actually, this phase 2 is actually going to report out pretty soon. I think it's already underway and they're not enrolling. And I should mention University of Michigan was involved in that trial as well as that prevention trial I was telling you about. So what about other targets? I just got a few things here and then we can wrap up. Synapses, we talked a lot about synapses. Graham gave you a great overview of what the synapses are, right? So we know that, here's a little cartoon, right? These are our neurons in the brain. They send out these branches, and those branches connect with and communicate with each other. And they do that through these connections called synapses. And again, that's sort of a cartoon similar to what Graham was showing. That's how they talk to each other. And these synapses are disconnected in Alzheimer's disease, so you're losing that communication, right? And if you have 100 trillion of these synapses in your brain, which is really the basis for why the human brain is so, complex, right? And how it can do so many incredible things. But they become disconnected in AD, so to my thinking, targeting that is a great target, right? And so there's this, that leads us to this START trial. And the results are actually going to be coming in next year, so that's exciting. So this is a synaptic therapy Alzheimer's research trial. It's actually in phase 2. So again, it's not the phase 3 yet, but we'll get the phase 2 next year. And so it might actually get fast tracked to phase 3. And this drug is zervimesine, I can never say this right. It binds to that receptor, and this complex is actually at the synapses. So when it binds to that complex, it actually keeps, it protects those synapses from disconnecting. At least it did in like animal models and things like that, right? And they've shown that it's fairly safe in some of the previous trials. And so now they have 560 folks. They'll have mild cognitive impairment. They'll have that, so again, more early stage. They'll have amyloid and tau PET positive folks. And then they'll put them on placebo or lower high dose drug, right? And that's for 18 months. And again, the idea is to see if they can lower the blood levels of amyloid and tau. But this time for imaging, they're actually going to see if the drug can actually slow the shrinkage of the brain on MRI. So, when you're losing those synapses, that's indicative of those neurons actually dying too. And as the neurons and the synapses disconnect, the brain starts to shrink. And so here's an MRI of a brain from a cognitively normal person. And you can appreciate the difference between this and this, right? This is the MRI of a person with actually advanced Alzheimer's disease, okay? And this is a person with mild cognitive impairment, kind of in the middle. So what they want to see is if the drug will actually slow the brain shrinkage on the MRI, okay? And again, the idea is to get it to phase 3 as fast as you can if it's successful. Okay, 2 more to look out for, and then we'll wrap it up. And the reason I like these is because they're the multi-hit therapies I was talking about, okay? And who comes up with these names? I don't know. This one's called Buntanetap. whatever. But it's a multi-hit therapy. It inhibits both that amyloid and the tau, but it also acts as a cholinesterase inhibitor that Graham was talking about, right? So it keeps acetylcholine levels in your brain higher, and the drugs that were developed 30 years ago that have been on the market that long that help with the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, those are like the Aricept and the Exelon, those are the cholinesterase inhibitors. So here's a drug that can inhibit amyloid and tau, but also have some other properties as similar to the Aricept, right? And it also has been shown to protect synapses in certain models. And again, the cool thing about this is these are both phase 3, and they should both be completed next year. So this one it's not a huge study, but it's still big, 760 folks. And they have mild cognitive impairment or early AD, and they're going to be on placebo or drug for 18 months, okay? And they're going to see if the goal is to slow cognitive decline and improve activities of daily living, and then just show that they're lowering amyloid and tau. The second one is this AR1001. It doesn't have a funny name yet. I'm sure that's coming. But this is the Polaris trial. And this is another multi-hit therapy. It inhibits amyloid and tau, but it also improves brain blood flow, okay? And it also seems to have neuroprotective properties, okay? So again, sort of a multi-hit idea. Now, this is a big trial, over 1,000 people with mild cognitive impairment or early symptoms, and they'll get the placebo or drug for 18 months. And again, the goal is the same, to show that they are slowing cognitive decline in the people with the drug compared to the placebo, okay? And again, the beauty of it is the results are coming out next year, so things are moving kind of fast. Fast for the clinical trial world is an extremely slow world, okay? Things move because it just takes so long to do the trials to make sure the drugs are working. So it's good to see results on the horizon, right? And that's my summary. There are glimmers of hope on the horizon, I think. Again, we've got our first FDA-approved drugs in 30 years, so we got some momentum, even if it's not 30%, that may not be the momentum we want, but at least it's a start, right? We can start adding things, right? We've got 120 of these drugs in phase 2 or 3, many more in development, and several phase 3 trials coming in next year. And so, again, I think the common thinking now is that the best therapy is going to be like a cocktail, right? Of different drugs, maybe the amyloid drug or the tau, and then something, a synapse drug, right? This also sets the stage for personalized medicine, right? So, my cocktail may be different from your cocktail depending on our genetics and our symptoms and that sort of thing, right? The field is moving in two ways that I find very positive. One, moving beyond amyloid, right? Getting to other targets, right? And then two is this idea of earlier enrollment. So now that they've got these PET scans and they can get people, they can try and do these prevention trials or get people with really, really mild symptoms who also have the evidence of pathology in their brain. And again, like I mentioned with sort of the cancer drug analogy, right? A lot of times in the past, we've had a lot of failures in the Alzheimer's therapy world because the people that came to the trials already had Alzheimer's disease, right? And actually, not like early stage, but like in, mid stage. And so it was really just kind of too late to see an effect of a drug, we think. That's the common thinking now. And so, maybe they would have worked if we had enrolled people earlier. Maybe they'll go back to some of them, not sure. And I also just wanted to mention that, we talked about other dementias as well, right? Rhea did, I think, right? And so these drugs are also being tested for other dementias, similar to the psychiatric drugs, right? So, for instance, that ATP, the combination amyloid and tau therapy is actually, there's another study similar to that that's actually geared towards dementia with Lewy bodies, for instance. And that's all I have to say. Where do you find a clinical trial? Almost forgot about that. Take this number down. So this is actually the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And And it's at the University of Michigan, but it involves Michigan State researchers like myself. I'm one of the co-investigators, as well as investigators from Wayne State. So it's a sort of an all-state, research university collaboration, if you will. This is their website to look for clinical trials. Again, you could probably just go in and Google University of Michigan Alzheimer's Center clinical trials and get to where you need to be, right? But that's the number, and you just call and say, hey, I'm interested. The other thing I would suggest is this place called Trial Match, and this is at the Alzheimer's Association webpage site, alz.org, okay? And you'll go to the page, you'll see this, Trial Match, find clinical research for Alzheimer's and other dementia. And then you click on this Participate in Clinical Research button right here, and it takes you to a questionnaire. And, have you been diagnosed? Are you taking particular drugs right now? What is your diagnosis? All, different kinds of questions. But the cool thing is that when you go to search for the trials related to what you're looking for, right, through the quiz, you can sort it by distance, right? So you can sort it just for Michigan, which is really only, probably just going to get you University of Michigan and maybe something in Detroit or something like that, or just in the Detroit suburb area at one of the hospitals there. But you can increase the distance to include like all those universities in Chicago that are doing clinical trials, or down in Columbus, for instance. So you can do that. And in the meantime, I love to harp on this every year, so I'm going to do it again. In the meantime, please remember that modifiable lifestyle factors account for a 30% risk for all dementia. Okay, so again, this is actually National Hypertension Awareness Month. There you go. So control your high blood pressure. Again, we've heard this already. Sleeping well, healthy diet, staying active, staying connected. All of these things, lifestyle improvements can actually reduce your risk. Typically, in a lot of ways, it's by, what's good for your heart's good for your brain. So just to keep that blood flow going, right? And that's all I have. These are all the kids in the lab with one old geezer in the middle. And thank you. Okay.